through this computer. All right. Can you see the screen? Revelation Made Simple, square around chapter 12.
Yes.
All right, good. We are on the second half. As you see, the whole top row is finished. The next row is what we're on. Chapter 12 highlights a woman with a child, a red dragon, and a woman in the wilderness. And then a phrase, time, times, and half a time. So we're starting to get a calendar event in here again to give us some perception of the changing over time. We're going to be introduced in chapters 12 to 14. We're not doing all those tonight. We're just doing chapter 12. But we're going to be introduced to characters, and these characters are disclosed as being signs. So, what this means is whether we are raptured or we are watching from heaven or we're watching it from earth, we're not actually going to see these things as people. We're not going to see a woman, we're not going to see a dragon. We're seeing something that is symbolic, something that points to and explains another phenomenon. So we're going to get an introduction to those a little bit tonight and then over the next couple of meetings. So these are the key characters in the second half of the book of Revelation. As you know, we've covered the seven churches letter, the seven seals being opened, and all seven trumpets being opened. We're going to continue now with this Revelation 12, where we're introduced to a character. What's interesting is while they talk about the passage of time, we're actually taking time out from our timeline. This is not chronological. We're going back in time and we're going to get an introduction to this history of Israel, where Israel came from. And it's done in this symbolic discussion of a woman and her child. As we said way back in chapter 5, the first seal was open. That's the start of tribulation. Tribulation won't be over until we get to the coming of Christ way down here at the end of chapter 19. So we're about in the middle. We're here with a woman and the dragon, and we're going to discover the first and second beast next week. But this woman and dragon, we're actually taking a step back where where John is now giving us a history lesson of the origin of Israel. So part of chapter 12 and 13 are actually just history rewound. We're not actually seeing an unfolding. He's kind of taking a time out and explaining where this comes from. So he's going to start with Revelation 12. It's a symbolic portrayal of Israel anticipating the coming Messiah. So we all know that story in the Old Testament, how the people, even in slavery in Egypt, were waiting for the Messiah. They were waiting to be liberated. And Moses came and brought them to the promised land, but they still kept looking forward for the Messiah. And to this day, we know Jews, of course, still look for the Messiah. They don't accept that Jesus was the Messiah and will come back. But we know from our prior reading that when Jesus does come, people will acknowledge him, those left behind, those still on earth. And 144,000 Jews are going to lead the charge, lead the evangelism, if you will, of explaining to the rest of the world that Jesus is Lord. And then many multitudes of people will be saved as a result of that. They will accept Jesus as Lord. So in chapter 12, we see the birth, quote unquote, of Israel. We see the uh, fall, one of four falls that Satan experiences that we hear about in the scripture. His original fall, when he defied God, challenged God, and he and a third of the angels, described as stars, were swept from the heavens and cast out to earth. That's one fall. He has another fall where he's kicked out of heaven. And you say, wait a minute, I thought he was already kicked out of heaven. Well, Satan is actually still able to talk to God. He's still able to enter and talk to God. We know that from the story of Job, where, you know, uh, God is in heaven and he's having reports from the angels, and Satan is there. And Satan says, hey, this guy, Job, the reason he loves you so much is you're protecting him. Let me poke around with him and see if he still loves you. So there's a time when Satan still had access to God. We're going to read tonight about his second fall, where he is cast down to earth and is no longer in the presence of God and able to accuse us before God. We're also going to read about the birth and ascension of Christ. So we know this is history. We know this is something that happened in the past, in John's past as well. We're going to read a little bit about this battle where Satan is expelled for a second time. There's going to be some theological commentary that John gives us as insight. And then once we get into chapter 13, I'll talk about that next time. I'll save this slide and redo it, where we talk about the origin of the beast and the rise of this false prophet. So these are places where we're not seeing this experience that John has in chronological time. There are times when he goes back and recaps, almost for those of us who, might not know the story. So here's that first part of the story that is history. He talks about a woman and a child and a dragon. And he talks about the woman clothed with the sun, the moon, and 12 stars. So this clothing, again, it's symbolic of a woman. 12 stars, we know that to be the sons that were the 12 sons that became the 12 tribes. And there's a similar echo to this in Genesis, where Joseph talks about when he was um, captured and sold off by his brothers. They pretended he was killed, and he talks about the formation of those 12 tribes. And that history goes back. We're also going to see this male child destined to rule all nations. This is our introduction to the character of Christ, who Jesus is. And we see a quote in Psalm 2:9 about that, that says, "You will break them with a rod of iron, you will dash them into pieces like pottery." So we see this foretold in Revelation as well. We learn in verse 4 about this 1/3 of the stars slash angels that are swept down to earth. That's the history where John is telling us this history of the devil challenging God, wanting to, not willing to bow down, but thinking he was just as great. And as a result of his punishment, even though he persuaded a minority of the angels to follow him, the majority are still true. And, this is in no small part why good will reign, even though all of what the devil does is in service to what is part of God's plan. When we see the dragon discussed, we know that it is specifically, explicitly defined as Satan. And we see, the various attempts where Herod tried to kill Jesus, Pharaoh tried to kill Moses, all these attempts that Satan had of trying to keep the Son of God from coming. And had he been successful in any of those? Is there a question? Then there's this discussion of the woman fleeing in the wilderness, and it gives this period of how, this fleeing is actually a way of God preserving them through the Great Tribulation. The Great Tribulation is that second half. So you have a 7-year tribulation, first 3.5 years tribulation, the second 3.5, Great Tribulation. As we discussed last week about the woes and how the warning was that you haven't seen anything yet. You think that's bad, wait till you see the second half. When we get into chapters or verses 7 through 12, we're shifting back into the future, where John is discussing something that is going to come. Michael, a name, remember that word that ends in EL, has some kind of a connection to God, like God. And the name Michael is one like God, but we know it is not God. It's not Jesus, even though the Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and a few others say, Michael was just a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus. We know from the reading tonight that Michael and Jesus are distinctively two different beings. Jesus is God, Michael is not. He is like God. But anyway, he's the one who ends up leading the army that fights and kicks Satan out of heaven, and will ultimately be a part of that army that defeats Satan some 1,000 years after this event. We're told that, while heaven rejoices at the devil being kicked out, when he is now down on earth, he knows his time is short. And that's what brings about this worst of the tribulation, is that the devil really is going to go out of his way for 3.5 years to try to bring down as many of the people as he can. He'll ultimately, we know, be locked into a abyss for 1,000 years, and then he'll be released only to be almost instantaneously annihilated. So verses 13 to 17, we're going to learn about how furious Satan is, and he is furious, of course, with Israel. If he could stop Israel, if he could stop the Jews, if he could stop the chosen people, he could stop the purpose they have, which is to be a light unto the world, to not only give birth to the king through the lineage that Jesus enjoys, but also to be that witness, to be the 144,000 in that time period. So if he can go after Israel, he'd be successful, but he hasn't read the book apparently and doesn't know that he's going to lose. He also is the great deceiver and has so deceived himself that he thinks he has a chance here. So we're going to see this discussion of him trying to swallow up and otherwise defeat the woman, specifically her image as Israel. Not to be read right now because it's busy, but this is one of the charts you'll get when we're done. This kind of walks you through the things that happen in Revelation and how they parallel with Daniel and Matthew. So we see the woman clothed with the sun. Daniel talks about that in chapter 7, verse 25. And then in Matthew 24, he describes that, people in Judea told to flee as well. So you'll see these parallels. Again, we talked about if it's in Revelation, 90% of that is also reflected somewhere back in the previous 65 books. So lots of good information in there. We'll allow you to read through this when you get a copy of the print material. That's it for the orientation for tonight. Let me come back in and stop our sharing and stop the recording.